I'm trying to, because they're saying.
Hey everyone, we're going to get started in just a minute, just still admitting folks from the waiting room. If you aren't arriving muted, please mute yourself. Hey, welcome. So I'm Caitlin Coleman. I'm Water Education Colorado's Publications and Digital Resources Managing Editor. I am really excited to present today's webinar focused on produced water, calling it Turning Waste into Resource. We have 5 great panelists and a lot of questions to ask them. Before we get started, just some quick notes to, of course, remain muted while we're talking, while we're hearing the panel. And during our presentations, we'll allow at least 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of our time together. And so at that point, we'll invite you to turn on your cameras if they're off, unmute yourself if you want. You can raise your hand to pose questions. And if you want to communicate or type out questions during the presentations, please use the chat. We can always circle back on questions that you post to the chat as the presentations are happening. There are a handful of folks who are new to Water Education Colorado, so I wanted to give a quick introduction to our organization. Our nonprofit works to ensure that Coloradans are informed. Just a reminder to mute yourself if you're arriving and are unmuted. Oops. I'm sorry if I just asked you to unmute. There we go. So our organization works to ensure that Coloradans are informed on water issues and equipped to make decisions that guide our state to a sustainable water future. We do that in a number of ways. We're a non-advocacy organization, so we want to provide educational opportunities and engage Coloradans around water. So we do that, of course, through educational programs like this, but also through leadership programs, news coverage, and publications. Our membership program supports this work. So if you are interested in becoming a member, visit our website at wateredco.org to learn more and join. Our webinar today ties the summer 2024 issue of our magazine. It's our flagship publication, Headwaters Magazine. It ties that issue to this event. The issue focused on industrial water use in a variety of forms, but among those was water for oil and gas. And our panelists will go into more detail, but some quick info from that issue. We reported that roughly 1% of Colorado's total annual water diversions go toward oil and gas, which isn't a really big number, but most of that water is disposed of by injecting it deep underground. So it's removed from the water cycle. We also reported that while statewide estimated water use per oil and gas well decreased between 2022 and 2023, over the longer term, water use has risen. So that matters in our water limited state. So today we'll hear from our speakers who are involved in produced water. I'll lead our panelists through just a regular Q&A discussion, and then we'll look to you to ask your questions and hopefully address all of your questions. What else? I think the only other thing is that hopefully you saw the webinar is scheduled to last an hour and a half. Often they're just an hour long. So please, if you don't have anything else going on, stick around after one. Don't just automatically sign off. Our questions with the audience probably won't begin until after that point. And I think those are all my introductions. So with that, let's get to know our panelists. We'll have each of our 5 panelists introduce themselves and how they're connected with water and oil and gas and produced water. We have Hope Dalton, John Messner, Grant Tupper, Harmony Cummings, and Josh Kuhn. And so let's go in that order and start with Hope.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you, Water Education Colorado, for hosting this panel. I'm very excited. My name is Hope Dalton, and I am the director of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. It started in 2023, and before that, I worked primarily in regulations related to drinking water, wastewater, industrial wastewater, and stormwater.
Great, thanks. And next we'll hear from John.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name's John Messner. I'm a commissioner with the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission. Prior to this role, I was a county commissioner in Gunnison County. I've been a professional commissioner with ECMC, which was formerly the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. This is my 5th year. And I'm also the chair of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium.
Wonderful. And next, Grant.
Thank you, Caitlin. My name is Grant Tupper, and I'm the Director of Business Development and Operations here in Colorado for Select Water Solutions. It's in oil and gas predominantly. We also do municipal and industrial water service. I've been working in the oil and gas space here in Colorado for 13 years, and all of that time I was focused on water use in the oil and gas space. I spearheaded Select's desire to set up produced water recycling facilities in the DJ Basin and across other Rockies oil and gas basins starting in 2020. And I'd like to thank Water Education Colorado for the opportunity to participate in this panel. And I would like to see how we continue to deal with produced water in Colorado.
Grant, and then we have Harmony.
My name is Harmony Cummings, and I have 8 years of experience working in oil and gas. I was also the bill champion for House Bill 23-1242, Water Conservation and Oil and Gas Operations. I currently hold an environmental seat on the Produced Water Consortium, and currently I run a nonprofit, a community space in North Denver that pairs music, movement, and the arts with elevating community voice, environmental policy work, and healing. And thank you to Water Education Colorado for putting this on today. This is such an important topic that we definitely need more Coloradans aware of.
Thank you. And finally, we have Josh.
Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Kuhn with Conservation Colorado. I'm Conservation Colorado's Senior Water Campaign Manager. I would like to thank you for being here today, and also to WECO, Water Education Colorado, for hosting this event. Conservation Colorado is in the fight to secure a healthy environment for all Coloradans. Our mission is to protect Colorado's climate, air, land, water, and communities through organizing, advocacy, and elections. And we build political power that drives Colorado toward a better future. So thanks again for being here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, everyone. So then a question to get us started for all of our panelists. We're here to talk about legislation and new rules and work that looks at how we can reduce the use of fresh water and increase the use of recycled water in oil and gas operations. We'll get into lots of details on that work, but can our panelists share any perspectives on why this work matters? And you can all just, I think, jump in. I don't want to keep calling on our panelists, so whoever wants to go first, go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. So, I think everyone here understands that water is an important resource in the state of Colorado. And I think that the work that we're doing in this space around produced water creates an opportunity to be as efficient as possible with the utilization of our water and oil and gas activities, while also ensuring the protection of public health, safety, welfare, the environment, and wildlife resources. This is why ECMC is engaged in looking at produced water opportunities.
I'll join in with John. This is Hope Dalton. Reducing the amount of fresh water used in oil and gas through the increased reuse and recycling of produced water, which is the primary goal of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, is an important part of water stewardship in Colorado, and it contributes to community resilience and water conservation.
This is Grant. Tupper, and I would like to say I think it's important on this topic, not only because the citizens of Colorado have spoken about the importance of reducing fresh water in the oil and gas space use, but the opportunity is to save the resources and be not only stewards of economic growth, but also good stewards of the environment, which I think we're doing a very good job of. And we have an organized mechanism to make sure that that the results are being measured and analyzed to show the growth and progress that we're making in this particular area.
I'll just add, in the communities that I advocate for, I work a lot with Indigenous communities. We do a lot of water blessing, water healing, and just kind of trying to get people to have a different relationship with the planet and the earth. And to me, the first step in protecting the earth is connecting with the earth. And we ask people to really look at it. How do we foster that relationship and the connection? Because water is life and so imperative to all of us, my children, and all of the future children of Colorado. And I know that we are starting to see improvements, but water recycling in the oil and gas industry has significant higher numbers in other places and other spaces, which makes me know that it can be done here. And I'm really grateful to the folks in the oil and gas space in Colorado who are advocating for such.
I agree with all the comments that have been made. I just want to add that Colorado in the American Southwest is in the midst of the worst drought in 1,200 years or in recorded history. In fact, it's going on so long, we really shouldn't be calling it drought. It's a ridification. This is a new normal. And in order to ensure that we have the supplies to meet our increasing demands, we have to be doing more with less. And that's in every single sector of our economy. And so Caitlin had mentioned that it's roughly 1% of water is being used in the oil and gas sector, but that water is being taken out of the hydrological cycle. And so year after year, that compounds upon itself. And so it's critically important that we increase the amount of recycled water in oil and gas operations and reduce freshwater usage.
You said 1%.
You said 1%, I think.
That they use.
That's what I think you said. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And a reminder to remain muted if you aren't. So now that we have these kind of big picture ideas in our mind, let's step back and go into some basics. And I think this question is for Hope and Grant, but anyone else can join in. When we talk about produced water, what exactly are we talking about? And how does produced water kind of fit into the picture of water use in oil and gas?
I'll start off. This is Hope, and I have a few maps that might kind of lay the groundwork, so to say, for this discussion. Caitlin, will you be showing those?
Yes, I can pull them up.
So when we talk about oil and gas, of course, it's underground, and this first map is the black lines are the oil and gas production basins in Colorado. The major ones include the Denver-Julesburg Basin, the Piceance Basin out west, the San Juan Basin to the south, and the Raton Basin also south central. But the DJ Basin, or the Denver-Julesburg Basin, is in the South Platte and Republican water basins. And this is also close to the Denver metro area, and where the prediction is most of the oil and gas activities will be occurring in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years. The next map really shows the oil and gas basins in a little more detail. All of those dots that you see, those are active wells. So that's where the production is occurring right now. And you'll see there's a lot in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, and some of those blank spots that don't have the dots, that's where perhaps oil and gas is predicted to continue operations. And so that's the focus that many industry professionals have is on the Denver-Julesburg Basin. The next slide is looking at infrastructure, and really we'll get to that answer of what is produced water. So when oil and gas is brought to the surface, it's brought to the surface with oil and water. That water is taken usually by truck, but sometimes by pipeline. This is an example in that DJ Basin, which is in the Denver metro area, kind of more east. And that truck either goes to a disposal site where it is disposed of deep underground, and the other option is to take it to a storage facility where it's treated, reused for hydraulic fracturing. And the next slide is an example of produced water infrastructure where coal bed methane is being extracted from the ground. And this is generally occurring in Western Colorado, especially Southwestern Colorado. And the water also comes up with the gas. It's separated. There are many more pipelines out west, and it's taken generally by pipeline to a storage facility where it's treated and then recycled or reused. Some of it also goes for disposal. And that's the end of my presentation, Caitlin. I'll hand it off to Grant to talk a little more from the industry perspective.
Thank you, Hope. That was a really good overview of the oil and gas space and some of the produced water here in Colorado. As you already said, the major focus basin in Colorado is the Denver-Julesburg Basin, the DJ Basin, which is where a lot of the activity is. It's also the largest basin. And produced water, as for those who don't know or not work in the oil and gas space, is just the water that comes up from oil and gas mining. So it's deep, trapped groundwater that comes back up, and some of it is returned with hydrofracturing. There's always been produced water that comes up with oil and gas, whether it's vertical drilling or it's horizontal drilling. On the horizontal drilling, there tends to be a bit more that comes back up just by the nature of the way that particular process works. As Hope said, there's you can transport this away from the oil and gas site after it's been separated from the hydrocarbons by truck or by pipeline. It was typically in the beginning of the growth of the DJ Basin in particular, transported by truck, but there's been a significant push over the last 5 years, I would say, or 7 years, to put pipeline infrastructure in the ground that takes this away by pipeline as well. And it can go in the same right of way or same trench as you have your oil and gas takeaway lines. We used to turn gas into a waste stream, and we stopped that in Colorado, and we're doing the same thing with produced water. Being able to bring the produced water to a specific area by pipeline is what helps facilitate its reuse. Vertical drilling typically used less water than horizontal drilling by the nature of the way the process works. And it's this increase in technology, this new technology being implemented, as well as the parts of the process that allow for produced water recycling and reuse to be feasible, because then you can use it at volume that's coming up. The basins across Colorado that you showed there on that map all vary geologically for how much water they produce. Colorado as a whole, if you compare Colorado to the rest of the United States and the oil and gas fields across the United States, produces significantly less produced water than some other basins that come back up, but it's not always the lowest. The DJ Basin itself doesn't produce a high volume, and neither does the Piceance Basin. A lot of the stuff in the Raton Basin and the San Juan Basin are still vertical drills, and they also do not produce a significant amount of produced water just by the nature of the way that that system works. I think that's a pretty good overview of if you don't know what produced water and how we're using it in the field right now.
Great, thank you. And so I think a question for Grant again is I'm wondering how produced water has been treated currently and historically and dealt with or disposed of. And then maybe John can weigh in right after Grant finishes how ECMC handles produced water regulations.
Yes, thank you, Caitlin. Typically, produced water was taken to a underground injection and control well that we typically call a saltwater disposal well. At these facilities, whether it's trucked in or piped in, these facilities have a process for removing the rest of the hydrocarbons if there's any holdover. And as the technology gets better and better, there's less holdover hydrocarbons into the produced water. And then it is injected in a very deep underground formation. And these underground formations are typically significantly deeper even than the wells that we're drilling. And it's there for underground injection control. There's a lot of stipulations on those for people who don't know. It's controlled by the state. It's called a Class 2 well. It's controlled by the state. And there's a cutout there for the EP instead of the EPA. And John can speak to some of those regulations as well. But typically, it was taken and injected underground and held there in deep underground injection wells. More recently, as the technology has advanced and due to the increase in horizontal drilling and the increase in overall produced water production, we've been finding ways to reuse this waste stream. Much the same way we've found to capture the gas that we were burning off, we found ways to aggregate the water together in large enough quantities that it can be treated and then reused in the horizontal drilling process and the completions process total. So that is taking the pressure off of the saltwater disposal wells we call SWDs, so the underground injection and control, and it is being reused in the actual process and then returned. It's a cycle, so that would also return with the oil and gas production that's turned on. But that is how you decrease the overall freshwater use in the state of Colorado.
Thanks, Grant. I can talk a little bit about the regulatory process for produced water in the state of Colorado. So produced water is considered an exploration and production waste product, and so is regulated by the Energy and Carbon Management Commission in cooperation with the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. And so ECMC regulates the production, storage, transportation, recycling, disposal, and retirement of produced water and produced water facilities. So from the permitting stage, the requirement for operators to provide both water plans and waste management plans, through reporting requirements once the wells are in operation, and the permitting and production of those both oil and gas wells as well as Class 2 injection wells, inspections, and if necessary, enforcement operations around the produced water facilities, and then final retirement and reclamation. So ECMC has processes for managing all of this from a regulatory standpoint throughout the state for all oil and gas activities.
Great, so thank you. So in 2023, Colorado passed House Bill 1242, which did many things, but one of those was creating the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, and it called for this reduction in freshwater use in oil and gas. So Hope, and probably John also, can you share more about that act and the work of the consortium, and how that compares with your work with other consortiums?
Yeah, I can provide a little bit of kind of background and history, and then I'll let Hope talk about the work of the consortium itself. But starting in about 2021, I had convened a group of stakeholders to explore the possibility of development of a Colorado Produced Water Consortium. I think at that time, James Rosenblum was a professor at the Colorado School of Mines, had given a presentation to the Energy and Carbon Management Commissioners about produced water and reuse and recycling of produced water, and explored or shared the idea of potentially creating a Colorado Produced Water Consortium to look at ways to increase reuse and recycling of produced water and decrease the amount of fresh water that's being utilized in oil and gas activities around the state. And so over the course of about a year, we worked with the stakeholders, and Grant was a part of that process. We first asked the question whether it was a good idea to develop a Colorado Produced Water Consortium in the state, and the answer to that was overwhelmingly yes. At that time, there was a produced water consortium both in the state of New Mexico as well as Texas. And it seemed like there was an opportunity to build on the work that those two consortiums had been doing and look at the development of produced water consortium in the state of Colorado. Around that time, Harmony, in cooperation with State Rep Basenecker, we're looking at running a bill around produced water for the state of Colorado. And there was some synergy that was created between the efforts of both Rep Basenecker and Harmony and some of the ideas that were coming out of this stakeholder group around the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. And so through those efforts and the ultimate passing of HB 23-1242, the Colorado Produced Water Consortium was formally created, and Hope was hired as the director of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, I think in July of 2023. And I'll let Hope talk about the work of the consortium since then.
Thank you, John. And I actually started late September of 2023. And that's when the consortium had their really first strategic planning meetings. And so the consortium got together and they decided on what to focus on. And the first set of activities was related to reports that are required per the House Bill 23-1242. So the House bill required the consortium to produce 9 reports. They're data heavy, required quite a bit of work identifying available data, and all of that data is generally publicly available. And then we did some analysis and we got community input and we produced 8 reports. They're pretty intense. Like, many of them have over 100 pages, and all of those laid the groundwork for creating recommendations for the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, ECMC, to consider when they held their produced water rulemaking. And I really am quite proud of the work that the consortium, which is 31 members, very diverse members, including regulators from state and federal agencies, research and higher ed, environmental, NGOs or non-governmental organizations, oil and gas industry representatives, local government, produced water experts. And what I'm super proud of is that we have appointments that represent disproportionately impacted communities and environmental justice, which really sets us apart from the other state-produced water consortiums. Speaking of the other states, New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium was the first state consortium to start, and they've been around for about 5 or 6 years. And they're really focused on research and identifying what is in produced water. And they're housed in New Mexico State University. The Texas Produced Water Consortium came online about 2 years later, and they are also focused on research. In addition to testing technologies, they're also looking at the economics of reusing and recycling produced water and those unique challenges that Texas faces. They are housed in the Texas Tech, Oswego University. And the Colorado Produced Water Consortium is housed in the Department of Natural Resources or within state government. And we're primarily focused on developing policy. But the three consortiums really work together and leverage the research so that we're not repeating what everybody else is doing, but actually collaborating on especially those oil and gas basins that are across state lines. And it's been a really unique collaboration. And just this year, we've added Oklahoma State University and Wyoming University of Wyoming.
I would love to add a little bit to that as well. This is something that has been important to Coloradans for a while. And back in 2012, Western Resource Advocates had a publication come out called Fracking Our Future, that went into great detail about their concerns around produced water all the way back in 2012. There were conversations and concerns happening back then that seemed to fall off for a little while. And so a lot of appreciation to Commissioner Messner for picking this issue back up. And also, as he mentioned, Representative Basnecker and Senator Lisa Cutter for seeing the importance of bringing this legislation to the state of Colorado and the importance of having it held in a state agency and not in an education industry or in education platform that is often funded directly and solely just for the benefits of oil and gas. But this is our hope that it can also be for the benefit of all Colorado. And we advocated really hard to have this be a diverse group, including what Hope mentioned of our impacted community members, so that we can have more of this well-rounded approach. I know that for myself, a lot of times I feel like maybe the only woman in the space, or maybe the only one advocating for environmental things in some of these spaces. And so to have this consortium with the diverse perspectives has been a really great place to have meaningful conversations about water and what policy should look like going forward.
I just want to hop in too and express appreciation for everybody who worked on that legislation, especially Harmony. I know it's a big lift and you did a ton of work. And just to remind everybody, this came on the heels of a really tremendous drought that the American Southwest was experiencing at the time. Lake Powell was actually at its lowest level ever. And Lake Mead also was at such a low level that it was requiring mandatory reduction usage in California and Arizona. The federal government at the time stepped in with a mandate that if the Colorado River Basin states didn't come up with a plan to reduce its usage, it was going to require reducing usage of 2 to 4 million acre feet. And so it was critically important that Colorado did everything it could at the time to help reduce our usage. And so again, just want to thank everybody on the consortium for taking on this heavy work. Hope mentioned all of the documents that have been created. And so this is a really meaningful step forward to ensure that we're more resilient, because we know, because of climate change and increased demands, that drought isn't going away. This is the new normal that we have to live with.
Real quick, I just want to add one more. Thank you, Josh, for that, because one of the things we advocated hard in the legislative process was for the legislative declaration to include a lot of the sentiments that Josh is referring to about the historic drought that we are facing and will be continuing to face. That really sets the framework for why this legislation was created and the intent behind it to conserve Colorado's precious water resources.
Okay, thanks everyone. So I think Hope mentioned this a little bit, and when we had started planning this webinar, we were expecting rules to be approved at this point. So I wanted to hear from Hope and John and anyone else, that 2023 legislation called for the ECMC to approve rules to reduce freshwater use by late December 2024. And that deadline has been pushed back a bit. And I think a second time it was pushed back maybe. So I'm wondering if you can tell us about the consortium's recommendations for those rules, how that kind of filtered into the rulemaking, where we are in the process right now, and how the proposed rules look now, or what to expect as we move forward.
Thank you, Caitlin. You are correct. The Colorado Produced Water Consortium submitted recommendations to ECMC on September 17th, 2024. Per the House Bill 23-1242, the Colorado Produced Water Consortium needed to provide timeline and targets for increasing the reuse and recycling of produced water, with the ultimate goal of reducing freshwater use in oil and gas. We took all that we learned from the 8 report, and we came up with these recommendations for a graduated timeline of increasing the reuse and recycling of produced water instead of other water sources such as freshwater source. We submitted that to ECMC, and I'm going to hand it off to John to talk about what ECMC did next.
Sure. Thanks, Hope. So the consortium did provide very detailed recommendation to the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission about produced water and the produced water rulemaking. ECMC staff took those recommendations from the Colorado Produced Water Consortium and developed those into draft rules for the rulemaking. Also incorporated other elements of HB 23-1242, which included significant reporting requirements associated with produced water, and incorporated those into the rules. And Deputy Director Greg Duranlo was integral in developing the draft rules, understanding that in a rulemaking, there's always draft rules that come out at the beginning of the rulemaking to give stakeholders an opportunity to provide feedback and input on those prior to the start of the rulemaking. Oftentimes in rulemakings, those draft rules could go through 1 or 2 iterations prior to the rulemaking. Once the ECMC draft rules came out and parties started to provide feedback on those draft rules in anticipation of the rulemaking, there was some desire by a number of parties in the rulemaking to look at modifications to the draft rules or suggestions. And those parties asked for additional time to work together collaboratively to see if they could come up with consensus on modifications to those draft rules. And so in order to allow that collaboration to occur, ECMC moved the dates of the rulemakings now a couple of times to allow for that additional work to be done with the parties and stakeholders in the rulemaking. So currently the rulemaking is set to start on February 27th. And as of today, I haven't seen any additional requests for moving those dates. And so I think we'll move forward on February 27th with the rulemaking. The rulemaking will take as long as it takes in order to be able to accomplish the rules, and look forward to that process getting underway and continuing to work towards the goals of HB 23-1242.
And Harmony, you've been working with community members to both increase their knowledge about produced water, but also share information about how they can participate in the formal public process. Can you talk about that work?
Yeah, one of the things that we do at our nonprofit is definitely elevate community voice. This has been a much more challenging space to participate in because most people don't have any kind of background understanding about what produced water is. And myself and many of us on the consortium are still learning. And there's a huge lack in data that has been available that has made it challenging for the consortium to be able to deliver all of their things that targets that they needed to in reporting, and also part of the delay in this rulemaking. I have a slide when the time is right that I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. But we're out here, we have a little watch party in the next room. I have my intern with me here, and we teach youth, we teach medical students, we teach impacted community members how to give public comment. Also, we build coalitions to try to participate in and get party status in these rulemakings. And behind the scenes, we are out here talking to folks, having educational, informational sessions, creating one-pagers. But it's challenging. The Produced Water Consortium, and I have to give a big round of applause to Hope. She's done a tremendous job in her position, giving limited time, limited resources, and a lot on her plate. One of the great things that she started was a story map, but it's not to completion. It would be a great tool to provide to community members. We just need the funding for the state to be able to get things like this across the finish line. I'm lucky that I sit on this consortium, and that's why I have access to this information. But to be able to have this information available to the public, to have a greater understanding about what produced water is. And one of the things that I advocated for in the legislation that we didn't get in the legislation was to have cumulative annual totals of fresh water. I think that's a key and important number to see year after year, to see, are we conserving water or is it going up? Things like that. So I know that was a little bit all over the place, but community work is sometimes a little bit all over the place.
Thank you, and thanks for all that work. So Josh, Conservation Colorado is one of the parties that moved for that continuance in the rulemaking. Can you share anything about kind of those negotiations and talks anything about those negotiations or what you see as positive or negative in the draft rules?
Sure, happy to. And want to just begin by thanking Commissioner Messner and others on the ECMC for providing additional time. So as you mentioned, Conservation Colorado did file for party status so that we're able to have a role in the formal rulemaking process. Throughout that process, we really appreciate the thoughtful, solution-oriented negotiations that have occurred with members of the oil and gas industry. And we're hopeful that the commission will adopt the consensus draft that we've submitted. So within that, our goals are to expand investment and infrastructure in the DJ Basin to increase recycling produced water with oil and gas operations. At the same time, we want to ensure that we're maintaining current levels in the Piance areas and that there's not any backsliding of recycled water usage so that we can better protect communities, air, water, and wildlife. And so it's also important to highlight there's a statutory requirement in HB 23-1242 prohibiting new centralized produced water facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. And our consensus draft includes language that will protect DICs or disproportionately impacted communities. Okay, now to get to some of the requirements. So to begin, starting in January 1st, 2026, there's a requirement that oil and gas operations will have to increase its usage to 4%, and that has to be done by 2030. We believe this can be met, but again, you can see there's challenges making sure that we have that level of usage in the DJ Basin while not having any backsliding on the Piance and in the Western Slope. Those percentages increase to 10% by 2034, which we believe are absolutely reasonable. And again, there's consensus on this agreement. And then starting on January 1st, 2034, those percentages increase to 20% and then 35% by 2038. It's really important to recognize that there's a lot of uncertainty, and Harmony alluded to this, about how much produced recycled water is actually available. And so there was some disagreement in the negotiations around whether or not there's what we call out-year targets of 20% in 2034 or 35% in 2038 are achievable. So I believe there's more time is needed to ensure that we can meet those rates. And over that time, we need to be making sure that there's accurate data being collected to help make the determination of whether or not those rates are reasonable. But we have included, again, those rates in our consensus proposal that we hope the ECMC is going to adopt. So just to unpack a little bit more around some of the challenges that we've been discussing in the negotiations. So I think I mentioned this, but the Piceance Basin has rates over 90% for produced recycled water. And so it's critically important that there's not backsliding on the western slope. We have to make sure that operators continue to use such high amounts of produced recycled water, while at the same time, we're increasing usage in the DJ Basin. Let me just look at a couple notes. And so here's another challenge, is that we at Conservation Colorado want to ensure that increased produced recycled water doesn't come at the cost of increased air emissions. And so Grant might be able to talk about this a bit more, but the process of recycling produced water can result in increased greenhouse gas emissions. And it is unacceptable for us to have increased emissions, especially in the Front Range, which is already in a non-attainment zone, but also in the West Slope, which has very high levels of methane emissions. And we need to be finding solutions to ensure that the process of recycling that water does not increase greenhouse gas emissions, especially in communities that are already disproportionately impacted. So we believe more time is needed to unpack that issue, but do believe that a solution can be arised. But again, we just need a little bit more time. Part of this also is making sure that we know how many trucks are transporting water and the vehicle miles of those trucks, and making sure those emissions are accounted for. And so as you can see, this is a really complex issue. There's a lot to discuss here, which is why we needed a bit more time. But I think we've landed in a good spot, but not every single issue has been solved at this point in time. So again, more time will be needed. And I think I'll just kind of leave it at that for the time being.
I would love to jump in here real quick as well and add, when we were working on this legislation, that a lot of the community voices that we heard from across the state, that was one of their key concerns, was concerns around open pits and having air emissions, also emissions related to increased processing of produced water, truck traffic. I don't believe that it was being tracked, the truck traffic, before this legislation, and that was a key part to this, as that was definitely a huge community concern. One of the other big concerns for environmental groups and impacted community members is that there's lots of known and also unknown constituents in this produced water. And so we don't know what we don't know, which I think is always an important part that several people on the consortium bring up. They're also, one of the things that community also advocated for in environmental groups in this legislation were for there actually to be meaningful reductions in fresh water. We can see an increase in the recycling percentages, and also see an increase in freshwater usage by permitting additional wells, and those wells requiring more and more water as those laterals run down further and across longer. So I just want to highlight those points as well.
Thank you. And then Grant, kind of the same question for you. I wonder if you have reactions to the proposed rules, or can speak from what you've heard on the oil and gas producer side of things.
Absolutely. Thank you, Caitlin. This has been an excellent discussion, and I would like to start by saying, and this was alluded to when Commissioner Messner was talking about the creation of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium in front of House Bill 23-1242. Oil and gas industry itself has been looking at the opportunity to reuse this particular typical waste product, produced water, in the stream for completions activities for quite some time. The first fixed facility that Select created in the state, particularly in the DJ Basin, was up and running in 2021, 2 years before this legislation was proposed or introduced. I say all that to say this: the industry itself is on the same page. most, if not all, of the people in the Colorado oil and gas space live and work in Colorado and raise their children here. So we're working through several of the same issues. There's a lot of improvements in technology that have allowed us to be able to aggregate this water to a specific place and reuse it at higher volumes. And we've been able to advance the technology in these processes so that the water is cleaner and it works better for reuse in the oil and gas space. It's my personal opinion that right now that is where the technology is at on a large scale, is for reuse in the oil and gas space. We call that in-field reuse. I'd like to say that some of the stuff that John was speaking to, particularly about air emissions, I spoke to this a little bit earlier when Hope and I were introducing what produced water was. As Hope had stated, originally produced water, particularly in the DJ Basin, and I speak to that a lot because it's the largest active oil and gas basin in Colorado. Well, a lot of that water was trucked. There was other emissions considerations, et cetera. However, a lot since in the last 7 years, producers have been working to replace this truck water with water that goes on a pipeline. The technology continues to advance across the oil and gas space, allowing for this water to be separated on site, aggregated from several wells to one place, and placed into a pipeline. And the oil and gas producers are doing this on a larger scale across the state, which reduces emissions and it reduces truck miles. When it comes to the threat of increased emissions from oil produced water recycling, Select has been at the forefront of looking at and doing the research on exactly what these emissions increases would be for a particular oil and gas completions effort over the last 3 years, since we have the most prolific fixed produced water recycle facility in the DJ Basin, and we have found that those are negligible. We are still taking steps to capture more of it, if any, of the emissions, particularly methane emissions or emissions from hydrocarbons that are coming through for produced water. When you're treating produced water for infill reuse, you remove all the remaining hydrocarbons because you do not want to re-inject them in the well. That would cause problems. And so this water tends to have less issues with that emissions standpoint, but that is definitely something that the people of Colorado, the regulatory bodies and the citizens have made clear is a very important issue. And in my experience across the entire industry, we're taking both the replacement of fresh water with produced water treatment quite seriously and doing so within the regulatory bounds. And we're taking the emissions part very seriously. And I think Harmony alluded to this as well. There are some work that needs to be done, and it can only be done together in community. We need to look at these regulatory mechanisms that are being put in place. And I know that the commissioners on the ECMC and the members of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium have considered this at great length and are doing quite a bit of serious work on it. But one thing, just as an overall in produced water, the state of Colorado and the DJ Basin in particular produce a small amount of produced water compared to the amount of oil and gas that are returned. And I say this because I saw some questions in the comments about 80% reuse in the state of Texas. In the state of Texas and Delaware, there is a significant, and I mean by a factor of 10, more water that is produced with the oil and gas operations in Texas and New Mexico, and they are able to reuse that because it's produced on scale. What's produced here in Colorado is a significantly smaller percentage, and so that water has to be brought to a central place where it can be treated. We in the space are looking not only at fixed facilities but at mobile facilities to meet the regulatory requirements that are going to be enacted in 2026 and going forward, as John laid out when he was discussing what the rules have proposed so far and some of those increases. I think that it is very important that we in the industry and in the community also weigh the reality of what's actually available. It is not physically possible to continue increasing past a volume that is available inside the actual space. And there's a lot of moving puzzle pieces and parts, and we can work together to make sure that all of them come together and still are protecting and being good stewards of the environment here in Colorado, in the oil and gas space, in outside of this industry and in the community.
share a slide that highlights some of what Grant was talking about and speak a little bit to this from our perspective. You can see that we have it broken down. This is the information we were given by basin for produced water produced in 2022 and 2023 compared to water usage. You can look at the DJ basin and you can see that produced water is about less than half of what the actual needed water usage is. And I think it's important to point out that the DJ basin equates for over 90% of the water usage. And that's why, and this is where there's hundreds of more wells coming on to our densely populated areas, where it becomes where community members are saying things to me like, Harmony, we are trading our water for oil, and that's not a choice that I want to make. A lot of them have concerns about, well, how much of this oil and oil and gas do we actually use as Coloradans? How much stays here? How much goes somewhere else? When we're considering the impacts it has on our water resources, our land, and our air, it's just hard for myself and for community members to think, is this the right choice? And we definitely are leaning on the ECMC to help communicate this data a bit better to us and understanding the permitting decisions that are being made. As I pointed out, the DJ Basin has the over 90% of freshwater usage, but where I was originally going with this slide was concerns around data. If we look in this first column over here around produced water, and I add up what we were broken out, and this is something we fought hard for in the legislation, and it's a legislative mandate to provide produced water broken out by basin. This has been incredibly challenging to have this information provided. When this information was provided to the consortium, I added up the totals and then I compared it to what's available in the ECMC dashboard, and it's off by over 100%, depending on how you look at it and which way you go. And the same thing happens for 2023. I've worked for months now trying to dig into the nuances of this. And I know Greg's on this today, and I've asked him for a call in a meeting to set this up to better understand these things, because it goes again of why the delay in this rulemaking, the struggles the Produced Water Consortium has had, and the need for better harmonization of this data for it to be more transparent to the public when we're dealing with water belongs to all of us, not just one industry that's using it to the point of extinction. The other thing, while I have this slide up, that I think it's really important to say is we're talking about water conservation and oil and gas. What I see here is water usage actually on the increase from 2022 to 2023. Our freshwater or water usage is on the rise, and I'm curious what that number is to 2024. And if we don't start to do things differently, that number is going to continue to be on the rise into 2025 and into the future. And that was not the legislative intent here. Our intent here was to conserve water. And we don't see that happening in practice today. And I have concerns that that's what will happen through this rulemaking and going forward.
Okay, thanks everyone for your answers on those questions. So now a question for all of our panelists. And maybe you can speak to both sides of it as you look at this rulemaking and beyond. What opportunities do you see in the space, and what challenges and risks does it bring up?
Hi, Caitlin. This is Hope. From the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, we are looking forward to the outcomes of the produced water rulemaking, and we intend to review the timeline and targets on an annual basis and really look at that new data that's being collected and how it can inform these timeline and targets, and kind of getting to what both Josh and Harmony have mentioned. Are we really saving fresh water with these timelines and targets? Are they achievable? So we're going to look at that annually.
As this conversation has pointed to, I think the data collection is something I'm looking forward to, and making sure that there's reliable data to help inform whether or not increased recycled water is meeting the goals and the legislative intent to reduce freshwater usage. So I'm looking forward to that. I also mentioned earlier, and I think it's really important to emphasize, there's different amounts of what can possibly happen on this issue on the western slope and the Front Range. Grant talked about that there's only so much water in the DJ Basin that can be recycled. So how do we ensure that we're maximizing the ability to increase recycled water on the Front Range and maintaining those levels on the western slope and not having any backsliding for usage on the western slope? And then lastly, you know, how are we making sure that we're reducing air quality emissions while at the same time increasing recycled water usage? That's a real challenge that's before us, but it's something I'm excited to work on and hopefully find some solutions.
When looking beyond this rulemaking, I see a lot of opportunity for the increase in community conversations and involvement as people begin to better understand produced water in the state of Colorado. We've had a lot of those questions I've seen in the chat and a lot of the discussion here, and there's been a lot of this similar discussion and education on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium and all that. I believe Hope has stated all that information is available. When I look beyond this particular rulemaking, I see a lot of opportunity for continuing to increase the use of produced water in the completions activities and in-field reuse for oil and gas, particularly in the DJ Basin, as Josh has already said. There's quite a bit different water profiles about what's being used and what is available between the Piceance and the DJ Basin. I also see that the technology is improving. And while I would never put a time frame on it, I do believe that there will be possibilities with future testing and more refined specifications on what the treatment should be for possible beneficial reuse, because this source of water that is being pulled up as produced water from oil and gas would otherwise not be available to the state of Colorado. There's been a lot of conversations about the use to extinction, which is true, and the completions activity for horizontal drilling. But the water that comes back up is far too deep to ever have been accessed by any normal means. It would be too economically unviable, and you wouldn't be able to access it due to the way we trapped in the formations. So I think that there's an opportunity. I look forward to working in this space and working with the new technologies as it advances for possible beneficial reuse outside the oil field. And I do want to emphasize the word possible there, because I'm not advocating that we currently reuse produced water outside the oil and gas space until we understand exactly what specs we're treating it to, and that is agreed upon.
And I'm grimacing over at you, Grant.
I'm happy to share a couple thoughts here. One, I don't want to speak about the rulemaking because the rulemaking hasn't happened yet, and in my role, it's inappropriate for me to share any thoughts about the rulemaking until the rulemaking is actually engaged. And so appreciate the thoughts for the different folks that are stakeholders and parties in the rulemaking, and look forward to that conversation happening during the rulemaking. I encourage folks, as I read the chat, there's lots of questions and lots of information that folks are interested in. Hope and the team on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium has created a ton of information that's available on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium website that answer, at least at the stages that the reports were developed, a lot of the questions that are being asked in the chat. And so do encourage you to look at those reports that were developed over the last year and a half through the Colorado Produced Water Consortium and the work and the conversations that happened through that consortium. I think there's a lot of information there that would be useful for folks. And so do encourage that. The bill that was developed, HB 23-1242, is also on the Colorado Produced Water Consortium webpage, and encourage folks to take a look at that bill so that they understand the different requirements that are associated with that piece of legislation. And I think looking forward to the continued work of the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. There's so many questions about produced water that still need asked and answered, and look forward to this group continuing to ask the hard questions and dig into the solutions, around this topic. It's an incredible group of individuals with very different perspectives, and each of them bring an important voice to this conversation. And so continuing to be interested in furthering those conversations and asking the hard questions and trying to come up with the solutions in a very complicated topic. And so excited about those opportunities moving forward.
I think this back to Grant's point about outside the oil field usage of produced water, I think until we are seeing recycling rates at over 50 to 70%, that conversation shouldn't even be on the table. And many of the people who worked on this legislation in environmental spaces disproportionately impacted communities, and just regular people I talk to feel a very similar way on that, and very strongly about not wanting this to be on crops, not wanting this to be on dust suppressant, even though sometimes it already is, and being really concerned about what happens to the water in one place is kind of what happens to the water, happens to the water in all the places. As water moves and knows no jurisdictions, boundaries, rules, rulemakings, or things like that. And how we treat the water, we definitely needs to come to me with a much more holistic, protective approach as we look at caring for the planet and for future generations. I also think that there needs to be a mechanism in place for the ECMC to revisit these targets, as I feel like they're significantly low. And as the grant mentioned, as new technology comes on board, data infrastructure comes available. Right now, the Produced Water Consortium has to revisit these targets, but the ECMC does not. And that's really where the power has to take place to increase these targets. The industry right now is making billions of dollars in the state of Colorado. They have some of the smartest people working for them. They have access to so much technology. They really can be doing better much more quickly than they say they can, and I know they can do a better job. We just need folks out there to do them, so that I see that smile out there. But yeah, we need you all to do a better job. You guys make billions of dollars. This is everyone's water for the future, for the children, and I think it's really, really, really important.
Okay, thanks everyone. And Hope, can you speak to what's coming next for the consortium, or even beyond Colorado's consortium, if there's any thoughts on what's happening across the West with the other regional groups?
Well, I am excited. So thank you for that question, Caitlin. The consortium has a report that is going to be created by July 1st of 2025 on the toxicological and analytical methods being used, or those methods that are needed for better understanding what is in produced water, and what are the potential unintended consequences that we haven't really thought about when reusing and recycling produced water. There's a general understanding that produced water can be treated and reused for hydraulic fracturing, but beyond that, we really need that research. The other thing that the Colorado Produced Water Consortium is going to really look at is this new data that's being collected by the ECMC, as well as combining that with other publicly available databases, such as the public health, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the Division of Water Resources, Bureau of Land Management. There's quite a wealth of data out there that's publicly available, and how can that inform policy decisions and recommendations that the Colorado Produced Water could make. As far as what's happening with the other produced water consortiums, I am happy to say that we are all collaborating, and Colorado is leading the way in the potential of having these timelines and targets to require reuse and recycling of produced water, and that's very exciting. The New Mexico Produced Water Research Consortium is looking at, beyond identifying the unknown unknowns in produced water. What is in produced water? They're beginning to wet testing or toxicological testing on to determine, does produced water have a negative impact on animal health, which can be an indicator for human health. They're also doing pilot studies to see what is potentially being leached out of produced water. Should it be used for growing trees, such as in a greenhouse, and then those tree saplings being used for reforestation? New Mexico is more arid than Colorado and is really looking at finding another water source. Colorado is not there yet, and so New Mexico is really leading that charge. Texas has a huge problem with seismic activity and what to do with. They have so much produced water. Like Grant said, Colorado doesn't have the magnitude of produced water that Texas has. So Texas is really looking at that. Oklahoma shares a border and an oil and gas production basin with Texas. And so Oklahoma is looking at what do we do with this produced water. And then Wyoming is in kind of a situation similar to Colorado, but they're just getting into the produced water space where they're looking at produced water as potentially reusing and recycling it to offset their freshwater usage and, be really good water stewards. That's what all of the produced water consortiums want to do is create a more sustainable and resilient community looking at produced water and saving fresh water.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hoping to get into questions. I know everyone has a lot of questions. So in just a few minutes, but first I wanted to ask all our panelists if they have closing thoughts or things they haven't been able to talk about before we jump into those. So if all our panelists could just take like 30 seconds or less than a minute to share your big thoughts, and then we'll jump into questions.
I'd like to start by saying thank you for putting this together, Caitlin, and for Water Education Colorado. These are the type of discussions, and this is a forum that allows everybody to come together, a lot of people to join. I noticed that there were people from out of state joining, et cetera, that can be part of these discussions because it impacts all of us, and I really appreciate the opportunity. I think there's a lot of hard questions out there, and because there's no easy answers, we need to continue to work together. We need to continue to look for these answers as we continue to provide for all pieces of the puzzle.
I'll add to what Grant said. Thank you so much to Water Education Colorado for putting this on and the interest of all the attendees. Thank you very much because this is a relatively new space for the Colorado Produced Water Consortium, having just started in 2023. And I do invite anyone who's interested to attend the Colorado Produced Water Consortium meetings. We are having one this Friday, and although most of our meetings are virtual, this Friday's is in person at CSU Spur, which is at the Western Stock Show complex. But all of our meetings are recorded and we do take public comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin, for having us in Water Education Colorado, and really appreciate the perspectives of the different panelists. I think this is a pretty good snapshot of the different perspectives that we see at the consortium, and the different topics, difficult topics that we wrestle with. And so certainly appreciate the conversation today, and certainly would be open if anyone has questions offline. You can get a hold of me. My contact information is available on the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management website.
I'll jump in with some final thoughts, and just echo everybody's gratitude, both for Caitlin, Water Education Colorado, but for everybody participating today. And just want to encourage everybody to not lose sight of the forest for the trees. What I mean for that is that we, as I said earlier, are in catastrophic drought, aridification. Hopefully you've understood some of the complexity and challenges that we have faced in this issue around oil and gas and water usage, but don't forget the majority of the state's water usage is in agriculture, and then there's also a significant amount used in municipal uses. So this is an all hands on deck moment. You got to make your voice heard, stay engaged in these conversations to ensure that future generations are able to enjoy Colorado and our water resources the way we are today.
I think it's important to highlight that Colorado, I believe, has recently became third in oil and gas production, and we have thousands and thousands of active oil and gas sites, with more coming on every year, all the time, coming closer and closer to residential areas. We really need to be mindful of what that impact means to the people, the planet, the wildlife here for Colorado, the toll it takes on our resources, how that really benefits Colorado and who, and because there's certain people who are paying a much higher price than others. Again, this is a billion-dollar industry that needs to be pushed on to do better. Right now in the DJ Basin, they're recycling less than 1%, and without them telling to do, without us and with the help of our state agencies and government and passionate people out here pushing on our legislators and pushing on things like this, they're not going to do better on their own. So I think it becomes imperative that we have more voices out here asking to do so before it's too late, especially in the wake of what's happening at the federal level. And again, the intent of all of this was to conserve fresh water. And at the end of the day, if that's not what we're doing, then we didn't do it right.
Thank you all so much. It was great to hear your voices and hear your thoughts, and thanks for your time. So everyone who's here and not a panelist, I'd like to turn to you for questions. We have a lot in the chat, but it's a little bit hard for me to follow all of those questions. So I'd like to invite you to either turn on your camera or raise your hand. I see Jesse has a hand up. So if Jesse Hill wants to ask a first question, and then other folks can raise a hand or just hop on screen and ask a question.
Hi folks, Jesse Hill, and little question. Background comes from like process engineering in the oil and gas industry, but the initial pictures you guys were showing was more formed on like, we'll say the upstream production, the well pads and that water. Are these regulations aimed towards the midstream and any downstream, I guess, facilities? And then I guess, tied to that, dealing with kind of the stranded facilities that are out there, the water's currently trucked. Do you see more, I guess the overall concept of water rights, and developing water rights, is that tied at all to any of this here?
Thanks, Jesse. I can talk a little bit about it without getting, into any specific details, but the Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission regulates upstream development. And so midstream development and particularly downstream is regulated by other entities, federal entities or other state entities. And so this particular rulemaking is going to be targeted to upstream. What was the second part of your question?
I guess getting to like, I'd love to see, this water as other waters handled in Colorado with more decreed water rights. Water Education Colorado has been awesome at teaching me a lot of that information over the last year. So how does that tie into some of this?
Yeah, I mean, the consortium developed a report that identifies barriers to reuse and recycling of produced water. And certainly there's, a number of different barriers that were identified. It doesn't go into detail as far as any solutions to those barriers, and that's certainly something I think the consortium will be working on over time. But one of those barriers is legal water rights issues associated with it, liability elements associated with it, as well as infrastructure and storage and potential impacts associated with that. And so these are additional questions that need to get daylighted and discussed in order to continue to find a protective path forward for the reuse and recycling of produced water.
Thank you.
Looks like the Alliance Center, you guys have your hand up.
Yes, we're actually having a community viewing party here at the Alliance. Hi, Jolie Bronner. I have a question actually from a community member, so here we are. Hi, Angelique.
Hello there. Thank you for the consortium for showing up and for the panelists to come and bring your expertise. One of the questions that I had, following up with some of the information from former or past meetings, is that it's been indicated that the DJ Basin at its maximum capacity could only facilitate 40% of reuse and recycle within the DJ Basin. So my question is why are we having the conversation at all about outside of the oil field when in fact there's not the capacity to meet the oil field's needs and requirements for this? And until that is done, that there should be no discussion, in my opinion. And I would urge the consortium to take seriously these next steps as we look at the toxicology, because these unintended consequences, we don't need to relearn them. They're already in Pennsylvania, they're already in New Mexico. People, the radioactivity that has been documented and discussed in papers, peer-reviewed papers, is there in terms of one of the issues of produced water, that even the workers at the fields, in the fields, are having very, very serious, sometimes even fatal incidences based on the radioactive and toxic chemicals. In addition, I don't know how you can even think about setting safety standards regarding this without having full disclosure of what is actually in the water. If the oil industry feels like they have that proprietary right, then they need to give somebody the accurate information so that we can make educated choices regarding our public health and safety. And that I remind that the consortium and all these people in these positions, with your position comes responsibility to us as the people, and that you all are employees of the people, and that this is us calling for some accountability for those people who hold these positions to do your job and take care of us and keep us at the forefront of your decisions, instead of industry that clearly has no conscience in how they're moving forward. And this rush in this last year, in this push to make these decisions with such a lack of information, is unscrupulous, really, and sad, in my opinion, at how the public safety is being regarded by Colorado as headwaters for so many other people, taking these decisions very seriously and considering the next 7 generations, which is 500 years. These choices, because we can't undo this, and we are doing it for numerous people downline from us. So please look at this not from a financial perspective. Look at it from your heart when you make these decisions, to think about 5 years down the line, are you going to be proud of this? Are you going to feel good about it? Because if you don't, that's only on you, and that's something you're going to have to live with. We're all going to have to live with. And it would be a very sad situation for us all. So please, let's all move from heart and look at our children, our grandchildren, and lives to come, and the animals, and all of it, and the impact that we're having, and make some realistic choices and decisions based on what's actually there in the data, not just from the oil industry, but also from the workers, the public comments, also the papers being published and the news that's being distributed regarding these issues. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I'll answer the question that was in there. So there was a question about focus and infield versus outside field. So 100% of the work of the consortium to date has been on infield reuse and recycling. The reason that there's a report coming out in July doing a literature review on testing standards associated with beneficial reuse outside the oil field is that the legislation HB 23-1242 directed the consortium to work on that. And so the other elements with community and protectiveness, that's part of, you know, all conversations that happens with the consortium, and appreciate the comments that were provided. I think Miss Jolie Bronner, who's with you there, would be a good person to chat with you about that as she's on the consortium. Thank you.
And I'd love to elevate Chair Messner, maybe Jolie Bronner again. Sorry, I didn't say my name. I'm bad about that. There has been some work done on the consortium about prioritizing human health. I think it's a really important piece, but maybe we can elevate some of that. What are some of the priorities towards human health we've been working towards? And also there might be some questions on how we can do a better job with that, with community input. I urge anyone on this webinar, we love public comment. Comment at the meetings. We want to hear from you. We are your consortium. I sit in an environmental justice seat and I take that very seriously. And so I want to hear your public comments, but maybe we can share a little bit more. I know I know our director has been focused on some of this human health piece too. And so we can talk about that a little bit.
Thank you. Any other panelists want to respond to any of that, or does anybody else have a question? Oh, Nat.
Hi, hi Caitlin, long time no see. Thanks for putting this on. It's been a really educational discussion. I don't know, sometimes I think, and maybe Grant and John could react to this, or anybody else that has a feeling on it. Sometimes I think that after 37 years of hearing industry say this, that you have to set the goalposts and not change them, because certainty is really important to make progress and to know what the targets are. So why not do something in the rulemaking to require, oh, I don't know, produced water and water use reduced every year, 30% the first year, another 10% the second year, and just get to it. Once you have the goalpost, industry will step up to be a leader, and there'll be no questions, and then we get to write reports that makes everybody happy. I know that it would probably be challenging because of what Harmony alluded to as far as Colorado winning this prize of being such a great producer of oil and gas and exporting it for others to burn and create greenhouse gas emissions. But we don't really need to rely on that if we can also meet the challenges. And I would just like to hear what their thoughts on something like that is. Yeah, I know that it's not necessarily in an administration like this a preferred option where government controls have to take the reins, but maybe there's a way to negotiate a rate of reduction that is guaranteed.
I can speak to that a little bit. I think that what the consortium is doing and what the rules that have been proposed and what the ECMC is doing is having an impact on and requiring a reduction of freshwater usage. One thing that Harmony pointed out was that there was an increase in overall freshwater use or overall water use in, say, the DJ Basin in 2023. This was as production ramped up, but production plateaus and then will decline, and you'll see overall decline in those uses as that happens. Also, I think, and I mentioned this before, that in order to better utilize all the produced waters available, there has to be some different ways to consider what the options are for treating and storing some of this water for infill reuse specifically. And how you can aggregate it to the same place without increasing emissions, without increasing truck miles, et cetera. So there's a full picture to look at. Overall, even when there's a freshwater increase, there has been a reduction of freshwater by the use of produced water recycling. And I say this because any drop of produced water that is recycled and reused is replacing what we would otherwise use as a drop of fresh water. So while there was an increase because there was an increase in overall production in the state, we did supplant some of that, not a huge percentage because we're still working through all the metrics that not the metrics, but all the logistical hurdles that have to be overcome in order to bring the produced water in Colorado to an area where it can be reused. And Colorado is one of the most unique states in the fact that the different developments are spread out significantly and they don't produce a bunch of water. So you need to have some water sharing. You need to have different considerations for treated produced water with the hydrocarbons removed. And in all of this, there's an overarching concern to what the toxicology of the water is, how it's handled, but also the air emissions. And the industry is taking all of that seriously. So I do see reduction there in that going forward. And I think that the consortium and the ECMC is on the right path with the rulemaking of a overall percentage and those increases being stepped up. You have to tie the two together because as production decreases, produced water decreases as well. So they decline in parallel. We have a steep decline curve inside the oil and gas space of produced water, essentially in this particular basin. And a lot of times there's some comparisons to basins in Texas and New Mexico where they have a significant, as Hope pointed out already, significant water problem in the production space. So I think that to answer your question, we are working towards those. I think the goalposts are being considered, and I think they have to be considered they must be considered inside the reality of what's actually available.
Real quick, I would like to add on that the original legislation was calling for 90% recycling. And that was where a lot of folks wanted to start, and that's how they feel about how precious this water resource is. I acknowledge that the industry has a challenge that there's less produced water in the DJ Basin. That's also a huge benefit to the operators in the DJ Basin. It's significantly less logistics handling pain and significantly less cost to be a producer here because they don't have to deal with the produced water that other areas have to. So although that's limiting in their recycling, it's really important that it's beneficial to them, that it's something they don't have to deal with, and why the DJ Basin is so desirable.
So it's past 1:30, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I don't know if there are other questions out there, or I know Hope had to step away, but if our other panelists need to go or have closing thoughts, maybe you guys could say anything more that you want to say. And if not, then I will, I think, say goodbye to everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for the interest in the topic. And thanks for our panelists for sharing information and thoughts. I'll follow up with everyone with an email with some links, some information. I'll reach out to our panelists and see if anyone has slides or links or whatever to share. So you'll hear from me by the end of the week. And we'll include a recording there as well. You're welcome to share that out. So reach out if you have questions. Thank you for being here and have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Kim.